the questioning, and Professor Wass, I'd like to start with you first. Now, in your evidence, you talk a lot about the sort of characteristics of children's TV and video content that are really important for very young children. And one of the things you talk about is pace. Why is the pace of a TV programme or a video so important for very young children?
Yeah, so basically, kind of to start from the idea that our brains are fundamentally prediction machines. So every single word that's coming out of my mouth as I'm talking, your brain is generating word by word a prediction for what I'm going to say next. So if I suddenly cabbage, then as I said that word cabbage, which was unexpected in the context, your brain would have generated a kind of mismatched response. And we know from that and lots of other studies that this is a fundamental aspect of how our brains work. Young brains process information very differently for the very simple reason that they don't have so much prior knowledge, they don't have so much prior expectation. So their ability to do this predictive brain processing is very, very different. So we know from lots of studies that have been conducted very recently that what kind of maximizes learning, what young brains need to learn from most effectively, is slow-paced, predictable interactions. Yeah? So they need the same thing to happen over and over again because they're not so good at making predictions, so they need repetition to help them to make predictions. But also, because of this lack of prior knowledge, because of the fact that, to put it very crudely, the wiring diagram of their brain is much messier, yeah? This process of making predictions takes much longer. Yeah? So this is why young brains seek out slow-paced, repetitious, predictable interactions, things like peekaboo, things like singing the same song over and over again, things like reading the same book over and over again. And what kind of screens, and the modern world in lots of other ways, like urbanization, but particularly screens are giving us, is exactly the opposite of that. Yeah? For reasons I'll get into kind of later, the makers of screen content are increasingly kind of packing content, and there's really, really good evidence that this is a trend that's going up over time. They're packing screen content with fast-paced, unpredictable content. Yeah? And this is, as I say, exactly the opposite of what young brains need. Yeah? And the other aspect of this, and this is the kind of area where I think this is really, really important, I'm really keen to talk about this, is we know from, again, lots and lots of studies that have looked at this in lots of different ways, that if I'm in a situation where information is coming at me that is too fast-paced, that is too unpredictable, and my brain is struggling to make predictions to keep up with the rate of information that's coming at me, we have a kind of inbuilt mechanism to put our bodies into this kind of high alert, kind of hypervigilance mode, yeah? Which makes sense if you think about it. I'm in an unpredictable situation. I better be ready to respond at a moment's notice, yeah? So this is our brain sending a signal to our bodies that we need to be ready to respond at the drop of a button. So we go into what's called fight or flight kind of physiological mode, where our heart starts to beat faster, we get increased energy release to our muscles, and so on and so forth, yeah? And the thing that I think is really important here is we've got kind of good quality evidence from lots of different sources that children, when they're watching this fast-paced content, which is coming at them too fast-paced for their brains to process, are going into this physiological state. Yeah? Lots and lots of good quality evidence for that. Yeah? There is also kind of more indirect evidence that this might be relating to the large number of studies that have come out, a lot over the past recent years, specifically pointing to associations between early screen use and later life kind of behavioural and emotional dysregulation. So some nice evidence from the Department of Education came out for that yesterday, but also more long-term, specifically at kind of affective mental health problems. So that's to do with kind of depression and anxiety. Yeah? And we know that the fast-paced content triggers kind of this hyper-alertness, hyper-awakeness in a part of the brain known as the brainstem, which is very strongly implicated in conditions like depression and anxiety. So I think there's a really good, quality case to be made that this fast-paced content that we're exposing a lot of young children to at an early age kind of may be relating to these kind of behavioural and physiological behavioural and emotional dysregulation and these later life kind of mental health problems.
Fascinating. One of the other things you talk about in your evidence is the importance of there being clarity of visual content. You say that includes being able to see key facial features and to identify emotion on the faces of characters. Why is that important?
So again, this goes back to the idea that I started with, which is that our brains are prediction machines. Yeah. So as I'm looking at your face, I'm generating kind of expectations for where I expect your facial features to lie, where the outline of your face is, how your face will move, and I'm generating those predictions based on my prior knowledge, my prior experience. Yeah? So young viewers have less prior knowledge, yeah? So they're not so good at making those predictions. And one of the things that's very well researched in neuroscience is one of the things that we naturally do when we're communicating with young people is we call it hyperarticulation. Yeah? So we look at this first in the context of kind of child-directed speech. Yeah? So parentese. So naturally, when we're talking to a baby, we say kind of "hello, baby," like that. Yeah? We exaggerate our mouth movements. Yeah? And the reason that we do this is because speech perception doesn't work so well in young brains. But if I exaggerate my mouth movements, that exaggerates the difference between my speech sounds, which helps a young child to tell apart my speech sounds given the fact that they're not very good at it. Yeah? So we can take exactly the same idea in terms of kind of visual design. Yeah? So this is why, you know, most cartoon characters, yeah, have big black outlines around their eyes, yeah? And they have a big black outline around the edge of their face, yeah? It's kind of hyper-articulating a face in exactly the same way as we hyper-articulate speech, in a way to make kind of content easier to view, yeah? It's also why good quality TV does other things like kind of, we call it emotionese, yeah? Similar to parentese in speech, yeah? So when I'm doing, you know, when I'm seeing my friend, for example, and Iggle Piggle and Upsy Daisy see each other in the night garden, yeah? They don't just wave and smile as we would when I naturally meet my friend who I'm pleased to meet. We kind of clap our hands and we jump for joy, yeah? Which is a way of hyper-articulating emotional expression, yeah? So good quality content for TV, for children, for young children, will use this kind of exaggerated clarity, yeah, of mouth movements in speech, of the visual design when we're thinking about the visual features, and of the kind of emotional content and of the narrative elements, yeah. But this is something very much that quite a small proportion of kind of children's TV is aware of, and it does properly. So I think this is, if we're thinking about, you know, introducing guidance to help kind of parents to tell apart good quality content from less good content, I think this is a really, really important place to start.
Really fascinating, thank you.